This is David Laws going through how to answer an ACCA P3 exam question, and we are now up to step 3. In step 3, we are going to look at the words that the examiner uses, and we're going to think about what do those words actually mean. Many students don't do as well in the exam as they should do because they actually don't answer the question that the examiner asked, or perhaps they only answer part of the question that the examiner asked. So, analyse the external macro environment and marketplace environment of a particular company in Part A. Part B, evaluate the financial and non-financial case for and against something. And Part C, analyse each of the weaknesses. Okay then, so a verb is an instruction to do something. Do this, do that. A noun is what you are going to do it to. And mark allocation is how long you're going to have to do it. So, let's just have a look at Part A. It says, analyse the external macro environment and analyse the industry environment. Now, this may sound obvious, but there are obviously 2 separate questions there. And I have to answer both of them. Now, in P3, the examiner is quite generous. He usually allows extra marks. By that, what I mean by that is if you've got a 16-mark question broken into 2, like we have here, many students think you get 8 marks for doing one bit, you get 8 marks for doing the other bit. There is your 16 marks. But the P3 examiner isn't like that. He's quite generous and he says, well, some students will do a lot on the first part of the question, analysing the macro environment. Some students will do a lot on the second part of the question, analysing the industry environment, and it's not fair to penalise them. So, I have got down estimated mark allocation somewhere between 8 and 10 for both of them. You could potentially get 20 marks on that question, even though there's only 16 there. Now, that won't happen. Once you've got to 16, you don't get any more. But some students could do a very good answer about the macro environment and get 10, and then only get 6 on the industry. Some students might do it the other way around, get 6 on macro, get 10 on the industry. The examiner wants the marker to try and be flexible. If a student has done very well on one bit, fine, give them the marks. If they've done well on another bit, give them the marks. But notice that there is a limit to how many marks you can possibly get if you only answer part of the question. If you were to write 97 pages on the macro environment, the most you'd get is 10. So after a certain point, you're wasting your time. You might as well go on and talk about something else instead. That's a point that many students forget. So there's 2 questions there, and we have to make sure that we allocate the time to do each of them. Part B, evaluate the financial and the non-financial case for and against something. Right, financial then, 7 to 8 marks. Non-financial, 7 to 8 marks. And because it says evaluate, I have to come up with a conclusion. There ought to be 1 or 2 marks for that. Now again, just as I have just said, potentially you could get 8 and then another 8 and then another 2. You could potentially get 18 marks, but it isn't going to happen. You're only going to get 15 at the most. But again, a little bit of flexibility. Some students do well on one bit, some students do well on another bit. The best exam approach is do all of it. So do the financial, do the non-financial, do a conclusion, answer every bit, you're more likely to get the marks. Finally, when we're looking at Part C, the final part of the question, analyse how each of these weaknesses might be addressed. In other words, the examiner's being very clear. He wants you to do the same thing 3 separate times. I would like you to analyse weakness 1. Now you've done that, I want you to analyse weakness 2. Now you've done that, I want you to analyse weakness 3. And again, Many students don't do that. They only do part of it, and they can't possibly get as good a mark as they would like. So, in step 3, ands. Do both bits. I know this will sound obvious, but students fail the exam because they only answer part of the question. One of the things that I tend to do if I see the word and in the requirement is I highlight it straight away, and that means I now notice, look, there's another bit to this question, I've got to do that bit as well. Strangely enough, often when students do an exam question, they answer the bit before the word and for some reason, everything after the word and gets ignored. They just don't answer it at all. They're just throwing marks away. Plan your answer in relation to scoring marks. If you know that probably you will get somewhere between 8 marks and 10 marks, make sure you do enough to try and get 8, but don't bother doing more than would get you 10, because you're not going to get more anyway. Again, you'd be amazed how many students say in the exam, I've got this, and I've said this, and I've said it, and they just keep saying more and more things. There must come a point where we can't give them any more marks, and they still keep saying things, wasting their time. Practice this. Every time you do a past exam question, get into the habit of carrying out this exercise. How many bits are there? How long do I get for each bit? And those become your timings so that you know when you've got to stop each part.